Welcome everyone who's joining. It's great to see a lot of people. So people are still joining, but I think it's good that we kickstart. Welcome to everyone to our webinar today called Tools for Urban Design. It's an event that's co-organized by IAAC, the Institute for Advanced Architecture of Catalonia, and All Things Urban, of who I'm part of. I'm your host, I'm Nele Senyour. I'll be moderating today's session, and we are joined by great speakers from IAAC, Mathilde and Jacopo, who I'll present in a moment. So today's session is actually a round 2 from a previous webinar that we had at the end of May. It's a collaboration between IAAC and All Things Urban. You were many to subscribe to the first one, and now we're hosting a second round for those who could not join. And as you get settled, we're letting you know that this meeting is being recorded. So if you don't want to have your face on the recording shared later, you can turn your camera off. We'll be pinning the speaker so you won't appear, but there's going to be an open mic after that. So after the presentations, so that's that. And if you want to see the speaker in a larger screen, I think you're already viewing because we're in a spotlight, but in case you can switch from gallery view to speaker view. That's some housekeeping. And I want to invite you to already start dropping messages in the chat. Tell us where you're coming from. So I am in Madrid. I'll say hi to all of you, and we can see the international crowd that we have. I'm sure there's from many parts of the world. And yeah, so we're going to start. Today, we're going to talk about many things. We're going to talk about digital technologies, cities, ecologies, and landscapes, design, and an amazing educational opportunity to do all of this in Barcelona at IAAC. We have 2 great speakers, and before giving a proper introduction to them with their short bio, I want to let you know how today's session is going to go. So in the first part of the session, we have our first speaker, Mathilde Marengo. Mathilde is head of studies at IAAC, and she'll talk about introducing IAAC, and in particular about the Masters in City and Technology, with which we'll make a deep dive in. This master's is a really exciting educational opportunity at IAAC. It's quite a unique program that offers expertise at the intersection of urbanism, data science, ecology, takes place in Barcelona. And I'm going to post a link in the chat so you can have a quick look already, small spoiler. It's a link on over there. And as a quick note, IAAC also, I want to highlight that IAAC offers scholarships, including one specifically for women that we want to encourage you to explore. I'm also spoiling that here in the chat. So for the first part, it's going to be a presentation of IAAC and the Masters. Then we'll have our second speaker, Jacopo Neri, who will complement this introduction with a testimonial of his own experience as an alumni and current faculty at IAAC, and his part is called Life After IAAC. Then we'll have Mathilde again, who will present some projects and tools for urban design, really exciting. And like the name of this webinar, no tools for urban design, related to the work done in IAAC. And then finally, as you warm up and see all of these presentations, we want to invite you to start thinking of questions, whether post them in the chat or you can also join the open mic in the end. So we'll invite you to raise your hand and ask your question out loud to this room. The speakers will be here to answer all your questions, but we also have the extended IAAC team. We have not only Mathilde and Jacopo, but we also have Alex and Sarine, who are on the call with us. Alex Maremochoritis is admission manager, and Sarine Becarian is the MACT coordinator, so the Masters in City and Technology coordinator. And both of them are ex-alumni of the Masters, so it's one big family, and feel welcome to ask all your questions in the chat or in the open mic. So enough of that. Let me introduce quickly our 2 guest speakers. Our first speaker, as I said, Mathilde Marengo. I'm going to say a short bio, Mathilde. Mathilde is an Australian, French, Italian PhD architect who specializes in contemporary urban phenomena and the integration of technology for a sustainable future. Mathilde is head of studies at IAAC. She's also co-directing the Masters in City and Technology that you're going to present. Faculty and PhD supervisor. Mathilde is part of the Advanced Architecture Group, AAG, at IAAC, exploring innovative design approaches and technologies for urban transformations. Mathilde, you're also involved in numerous national and EU research projects, and your work is published and exhibited globally. So I'm going to put your LinkedIn in the chat over here, so you can reach out to Mathilde. And our second guest speaker over here is Jacopo Neri. Jacopo explores the intersection of architecture, computer science, and urban planning through his research. So Jacopo, you're going to talk to us about all your experiences. Jacopo has been involved in teaching activities at the University of Florence, the Polytechnic University of Milan, the École des Ponts Paris-Tech, and at IAAC, where he's now Faculty of Computational Design. In parallel, Jacopo, you're currently serving as a scientific collaborator for the Department of Digital Visual Studies at the University of Zurich and front-end developer at Numena in Barcelona. I'm also going to post your LinkedIn in the chat. So here goes. And now, without further ado, I want to give the space for Mathilde to kickstart the session, followed by Jacopo, and the floor is yours. And get warmed up for all your questions in the end. Mathilde, go for it.
So thank you very much for that introduction, Naila. And thank you very much to everyone for joining us this afternoon, this morning, or whatever moment it is in the day for you. It's a pleasure for me to kick off this webinar around topics of tools for urban design. So as Naila said, we will start off with actually a presentation of the Master in City and Technology, which is a space where within the Institute, within IAAC, which I will briefly introduce before I introduce the Master, we experiment with digital tools and computational processes for urban design. I will then pass the word on to Jacopo, who is an MACT alumni. He's also an MACT faculty and researcher at IAAC and in other institutions, and he'll tell us a little bit about how he's sort of delved into these tools and then taken those tools and made something from it afterwards, after the Master. And then I will take back the word and share some of the work that, well, Jacopo and I and other colleagues have been developing together with our students in terms of teaching and application. So again, thank you so much for joining us. So as mentioned, we come from the Institute for Advanced Architecture of Catalonia, which is a research, education, development and promotion, digital fabrication, and promotion center located in Barcelona. The Institute is quite a young institute. We're just over 20 years old, and we were founded around this concept of advanced architecture. So the understanding that architecture or spatial design, so not just looking at architecture as the form of buildings, but rather architecture as the capacity to design the spaces that we inhabit, where this capacity of spatial design is no longer just related to the physical realm, but also to the digital realm. So how it can be enabled in some way by technology, either through the process of its ideation, its materialization, or its lifespan, and so on and so forth. Today, as an institute, we're devoted to shaping the future habitat for our society, and more importantly, we're devoted to building it in the present. So we're not interested in speculating for the sake of speculation, but rather we use speculation as a design tool to be able to understand and measure the impact of design decisions that we make today in the future. We do this in parallel to the Fab Lab vision. So as part of our institute, we have the pleasure of having Fab Lab Barcelona, which was actually one of the first Fab Lab in the European Union. It's the biggest, and we from Fab Lab Barcelona coordinate the Academy programs. And so fundamentally, our institute is in line with the missions of the Fab Lab network, which is to give access to tools and knowledge in order to educate, innovate, and invent using technology and digital fabrication. Beyond that, we are dedicated to the mission of designing self-sufficiency for the habitat that we live in, and more importantly, I think our mission is in some way to empower people in order to work towards a positive future. And to be able to do that, we aim to empower people in order to make change within, for, and together with the environment that we inhabit, in order for this environment to become performative towards this positive future. So to be able to do this, we work, I would say, with 4 main pillars. The first is that we approach design through a systemic approach. So working in a multiscalar fashion from bits to geographies through the physical and the digital spaces. We work in a multidisciplinary fashion, and we engage actively with the practice of research within design. So working together both with science and creative practices. The second is learning by doing. In order to test and experiment, we work with real case studies, real-time information. We use the city as a laboratory, and we work together with the industry. This also enables us, as I was saying previously, to have real impact. So not to work with speculative conditions that we don't know how tangible they are, but rather understanding the impacts and shaping the future today. And the last 2 pillars are in some way this idea of sharing information. So we work with distributed educational formats, but we are also globally connected and locally productive as an institute. And finally, we are adaptable and horizontal. So we're all working together. We're all researchers. We're all in the journey of understanding and discovery together. So fundamentally, we have, as I was saying previously, these 4 pillars: research, education, development, and promotion. And all of these enable us to follow the digital revolution at all scales and expand the boundaries of architecture and design. And we do this in order to meet the challenges that we face as humanity. So as previously mentioned, we're here today specifically to discuss some of the content that we've developed in the Master in City and Technology, which is a program that we run at IAAC, and of which I've recently been placed as one of the co-directors of the program. So I'm very happy about that. So as we know, we live in a world of cities, and urban populations continue to grow at an unprecedented rate. So this calls for us really to redefine the way that we analyze, plan, and design for this new urban condition. And this is exactly what the MACT aims to do. So the MACT tackles issues related to the increase of urban populations, social exclusion, or climate justice, and more, and present huge challenges, but also they present huge opportunities for design. So in the MACT, we believe that if we place knowledge coming from different disciplines in the same arena, we're able to develop novel urban solutions and models for living. Through a multi-scalar approach enabled by the potentials of sciences, humanities, and technologies, we train urbanists and architects, engineers and computer scientists and technologists in the same space, placing them in one single team. And so by doing so, we have the potential to radically transform the urban and built environment. The program fundamentally follows 3 terms, each focusing on different expertise areas, and oriented to the design of digitally enhanced, ecological, and human-centered urban environments by intersecting the disciplines of urbanism, design, and data science. So working in scientific, but also creative practices merged together across different disciplines. So to start us off, we work in the topic of the Internet of Cities. The Internet of Cities explores the use of data related to ecosystems, mobility, air quality, or flora and fauna, with the goal of strategically developing work in the larger territorial context and understanding new ways of cartographical representation and new ways of visualization of energy, material, and human flows. And in fact, I'll go through some of the projects developed in this studio a little bit later on in the presentation. The second scale that we touch on is the Internet of Buildings, which deals with buildings as nodes, a large network, a new infrastructure in the city, and explores new typologies where buildings can offer the city services such as renewable energy generation, decarbonization mechanisms, and even the distribution of waste management processes. And then finally, we deal with the Internet of People, which introduces the significance of qualitative versus quantitative data, from data about how people feel to how people perceive spaces and how communities gather together in different spaces. These data types are sometimes not so easy to measure and quantify. By placing citizens at the center of the urban development, we are also working in developing technologies for participation, engagement, or co-design processes, among others. During the program, the students are also trained in the latest digital tools for computation, urban simulations, and spatial data science, as well as attending seminars on programming, dynamic mapping, big data analytics, and visualization and parametric urban design. So Jacopo will go a little bit more into this in his presentation, no doubt, as he's leading the computational urban design agenda, but also I will touch on these in the later presentation that I will be giving. So the program is run in 2 years, can be done in 2 years or in 1 year format. So in the 2 year format, the students continue on to work on individual thesis agendas that are supported by a series of topics of seminars. So the thesis agendas work within the context of AI for city making, participatory design through technologies, climate adaptive cities, and circular economy and cities. The students in the second year also continue to learn advanced computational tools for the analysis and design and management of urban spaces. And this includes, of course, machine learning and AI. The thesis development is also accompanied by digital fabrication and technologies for interaction, which enables the students to create demonstrators and digital and physical design interfaces, as you can see on the images here. And finally, the program counts with the collaboration of many industry and academic partners that touch on different specific topics and that enable our students to engage on one side within the let's say, professional realm directly through the educational format, but also on the specificity of these topics. So we collaborate with MICHub for the topic of mobility. We collaborate with Arethian for urban analytics and design. We've been working together with Foster and Partners in the sector of productive cities and urban design and planning. We also collaborate with MVRDV and the Y Factory in the development of ecological and sustainable visions for the future of our urban environments, and Urban AI with the City Intelligence Lab, which is part of the Austrian Institute of Technology. So just to recap some of the tools that we engage actively with in the Master in City and Technology, and some of the contexts we work in between industry, research and academia, the public sector, but also the capacity and the possibility to engage actively with EU projects within the educational format. So with no further ado, this is the quick presentation of the Master in City and Technology. If you have any questions about the program, please feel free to drop them in the chat. And I will pass the word on to Jacopo to tell us a little bit what happens after you've been through something like this.
Thank you, Matilde, for the presentation. I mean, I thought that I was already, actually, yeah. So hi, everyone. I'm Jacopo, and as Matilde was introducing me, I computational lead at the Master in City Technology, among other activities. Apologies, it's the first time that I introduce, let's say, an overall excursus of my life, so please be kind in that. I actually landed in IAAC a bit randomly, we might say, or a bit as an occasion. I was presenting my work at the time, my bachelor thesis, that it was work related to the urban space. In this case, I was presenting at the Responsive City Symposium, which is a great event that will be again reproposing this year, and I really invite you to check the work that has been presented throughout the different editions. In this case, the work was coming from, let's say, a strong interest from my side in computational design. It was taking inspiration from swarm intelligences, which we might say is that field of computation that tries to deal with flock of birds or a school of fish in order to simulate the movement of pedestrians within public space, but within, let's say, a design perspective. So in this case, how to guide it or how to take inspiration from it in order to build something with it. In this case, it was a very ephemeral, let's say, very ephemeral project. It was indeed a fair in the context of Berlin, and it was, let's say, a progressive, iterative process that started from an initial understanding on how the flow. It was trying to guide it through certain installation that then further went built. Let's say that this project from here was particularly useful, I might say, because it was the chance to meet the IAAC team, and I was offered a scholarship to continue, let's say, my studies within the institute. And that year for me has been a very intensive and very beautiful, one of the most amazing years of my life. I gotta be sincere in this, I never say this. because it was I got the chance to learn so many different things and actually also meet so many different perspectives about the cities. In this case, dealing with energy, and we were planning, but at the same time, not just from a technological perspective, but also from a participatory perspective. We were inventing basically how to engage with participation in the management of appliances for the production of renewable energies. It was also a time for me to learn how to deal with big data, and it was the first time in a way in which I was engaging within this world, and it was interesting how we're always critically approaching the city through it, and an excursus on the impact of Airbnb over the city of Barcelona in this case, and also some more creative approaches, which I really liked. This was a very small workshop, but I really liked, in which tackling from something that you might say that it was pretty annoying of the city of Barcelona, that is this shading system. We were actually providing a platform for digital artists, so CGI artists, in order to transform the city as a sort of an open museum of AI artworks, which it was a simple idea, but I liked the idea of, at the same time, also reflecting every time our approach to the city. Perhaps the project that I would like to talk the most was my final thesis within IAAC. I'm not going to go too much through it. I'm expecting that you know that the city of Barcelona has been for several years going under structural changes for what concern mobility. Indeed, there has been one of the plans that is trying to reduce in a pretty intensive way the use of cars, on the other side freeing a lot of public space. So the question for us, what do we do with this public space? How do I identify differences within this public space in order to further organize it, in order to further plan it, and perhaps also giving a platform for the citizen to activate it? And it was particularly interesting for us, for me and my teammate Sylvain, because in this case, we had the chance to approach many different layers coming from the city and coming from other data providers, and we were bringing them all into the same map in order to provide basically a platform for us to mix them through recipes that they were coming from, directly chat with the cities, in order to organize different activities. So whenever I wanted to organize a flea market, perhaps I would need the space that is providing me a wider, let's say, uncovered area, perhaps with paved soil, and where I can also have like a huge, let's say, a proper flow of people, as well as it could be also related to safety, or indeed like to more activity-based studies, such as where to open a restaurant. This for me was important, let's say, because it was an initial step of a research that I carried on also after IAAC, this idea of bringing many maps together to one single image that they could be processed by different users. And it was something that I brought to me back to Milano, where I was further studying after IAAC in the Polytechnic of Milano, when I was also involved as a research fellow. We did an activity that it was trying to map the extension of a city, and in that sense also try to provide an image of sustainability. What I'm going to show you is one of the many maps that we were approaching, but because it's something, let's say, some technologies that then I've been using in other projects. In this case, we were taking the outputs from the ecological footprint network, that it's simply a statistic indicator that gives us our impact on different typologies of land, whether cropland, pasture, foster, water, and knowing the amount of people within a city, and knowing how the most proximity, let's say the most closest areas to a city, in this case using what is called a cumulative cost analysis, we were able to map for an X, let's say for 1 million or 2 million, or how many inhabitants that city was having, the impact on those land typologies, in order to then further assess the quality of this impact through a series of indicators that we were accessing through many different literature reviews. In this case, what I wanted to point out is that this ended up being a completely different research from the one that I carried on previously, but it was still using partially the same approaches and perhaps also the same logics, such as you see here, that it's the decomposed of the previous image that I just showed, in which all the different levels coming from all sorts of data providers were colliding into one unique synthetic image, one unique synthetic map, in this case, very much of a risk map, that we were able to further aggregate and further study. This study has also been presented in many occasions, and is also available, let's say, at least this initial part, available online. Apart from being, I would say, an interesting and cute tool, it was interesting for me because it was also a chance, again, to further discover new bits of my research. I'm trying to give you a very broad, let's say, overview of also technologies, but also interests that you might nurture when you come to IAAC. And in this case, it was very much connected to also my activity as a teacher, as an instructor, because the moment that I needed to bring this tool online, I was actually looking for different data sources. One of them being Google Earth Engine, that actually ended up being inspired enough, let's say, to build a pipeline. This is actually a plugin. I don't know how many of you are already aware with Grasshopper 3D, which is an add-on of the Rhinoceros modeling software. In this case, what I've been developing, it's an open source plugin that you can find at the following link. It's also, so you have the open source, you could also be changing it. And it's providing you access to all sort of data that is available in Google Earth Engine, that it's, let's say, a data repository and indeed an engine, because it can also compute data by let's say, server side, then contains more than 36 years of studies and petabytes, let's say, of data. So in this case, we still replicated the exact study that I was showing you a second ago for a workshop that I held probably a year and a half with Zinarama colleague for the Cadria workshop. But the same process could also be used for completely different studies. This is actually class material for other classes, in which what we use is that we use more or less the same data sources, but in this case to tackle a completely different subject, such as the one of river dynamics, or again, some more urban studies in which we even bridge other data sources that are not necessarily hosted in Google Earth Engine, but rather in OpenStreetMap within the same platform. And this only thanks to the fact that we are processing within the modeling environment of Rhino. So in that sense, also having quite easy the bridge to the modeling aspect of it. And this work has been recently published in the Digital Landscape Architecture in the South 2 weeks ago. And you can find it online if you want to learn more about it. All this work actually brought me to another path as well, as Maria was introduced in the beginning. That is the Digital Visual Study Center at the University of Zurich, where basically I'm still very much approaching computation, but for a completely different subject. In this case, we're still looking at the city, but it's mostly related to how machine learning and artificial intelligence is impacting the world of art and the world of art history, indeed within the field of digital humanities. And I just wanted to introduce you to this work that we recently presented. Actually, I just got back from Helsinki for the Art Biennale, for the Art Biennial, in which what we have been commissioned with is how to curate a collection of art pieces, so artworks, that it's not being exposed in the city, but it's owned by the city. And so our idea was to expose it through the city. So in this sense, taking the example of how statues are creating monuments, are basically creating public space around them, and how much at the same time we might see that the public space is created through the monument itself. We placed all the paintings, all the pieces, let's say, of the art collection within the city, to then extract a 360 image. This brought us to a moment in which for each painting, we were able to pair a panorama image. And what we tried to envision, like also exploring the world of generative artificial intelligences and generative models, was the one of how to envision the public space, the space where the painting was ending up allocated through the lens of the painting. And this was done by extracting a depth estimation out of the image. So basically a 2D representation, that is this black and white image of the three-dimensionality in a way of the context, and a textual description that the same model that are behind, let's say, many of the products that nowadays we use very often within the AI hype, would be extracting out of the painting. So having these two indications, let's say a real place to place the painting, and having a textual information of what the painting, so what the place should be about, we were able to basically create and imagine for each place that we were finding in the city of Helsinki, different, let's say, different scenarios, different illusions through the eye of the artwork. So finally providing like a platform that is available online. You can find it in the RBN, in the website of the Art Biennial. A platform that was able to, at the same time, show us the city through the painting and show us the painting through the city. In that sense, provoking, let's say, perhaps new ideas, new critics about both the painting and the public space, and more than anything, providing a new medium to discuss with these models, and perhaps also the biases that are introduced in this model, but I would say in a creative and perhaps pleasant way. And I also wanted to point out this work because this is not the only work that recently I've been carrying on in a, let's say, curatorial perspective. Indeed, with Matilde, we have been recently exposing her an installation for the architectural festival in Barcelona that happened a month ago, approximately, I would say. And in this case, using similar technology, but approaching yet again a completely different perspective, a completely different subject. We have been working around one park that is currently more or less, let's say, in an in-developing area of the city of Barcelona. And what we try to propose is a device. In this case, it was a digital installation that was taking the user into plausible future, dealing with climate change through, let's say, two media. The first one being narration. So there were like 4 portals to enter our park, each one related to a completely different dystopic or very different from us. We might say distant, perhaps not that distant future. And we were able to have this first person perspective of how this other person was living through their narration, through their story. And then we were also invited to visualize this context. So similarly to the same technology that I was just showing, in this case, we were more approaching the spaces surrounding us. So being in the park, taking a picture, and if you were, for example, in the air, just to make a very simple example, if you were in the air future, which obviously air was starting to be quite unbreathable, it was starting to place masks, and people were definitely not as comfortable as in the real picture that we were having, in order to create awareness and perhaps also to try to bridge with these potential scenarios that are very much present. We constantly talk about climate change, but at the same time, they're very distant. We're not able to provide an image for them. And then finally, and last step, in which, depending on which scenario and depending on which, let's say, ecological perspective or ecological subject you were being narrated, you were able to further study projects instead in the present. So projects that are in developing that were actively dealing through participation and through design with the subject that you were being introduced to. And I think with this, I have finished my time. I hope that it was not too much, and I hope that it was perhaps that trigger questions. We will have some, as Nahilia was saying at the beginning, we'll have a session at the end. I'm gonna perhaps leave the stage to Matilde, that is gonna introduce some of the activities that we have been going through in the last years from a teaching perspective. Thank you.
Thanks, Jacopo. I see that there are lots of questions in the chat, some of which are sort of more straightforward to answer, so we've been answering, and some we will discuss in the discussion at the end. So I ask you to have a little bit of patience while I take you through a couple more examples and a little bit of an understanding of what are we tackling, what are some of the questions that we're tackling within the Master in City and Technology from a more concrete or project development perspective. So I'm going to show you 2 projects. One is focused on a digital tool, and one is focused on a more comprehensive approach to the design of territories. But both are contextualized within this idea or this concept of planetary urbanization, which is something that I assume we are all aware of. So we know that our populations are continuing to rise, and therefore the strain on the planet that we're living continues to become more and more challenging. And we also live in conditions of more and more uncertainty. We have a situation where, because of the way that we manage the space that we inhabit, the landscape or the ecological systems that form our planet are going through a large level of landscape fragmentation, which reduces the health and the capacity or the habitat resilience of these ecological systems. And therefore, all of this creates a condition where we really need to rethink as designers how we approach these territories, no? And particularly, I think, from the perspective of the context of the Master in City and Technology, we're interested in understanding how digital tools or data can enable us to understand different aspects or visualize different aspects that maybe we wouldn't have been able to do without the access to these tools. So the first aspect is a little bit understanding the question of time, or the fourth dimension of design. No? So how can we in some way, or we know that we're in a condition where we need to design climate adaptive cities, so cities that can enable an understanding of evolution, of change, of adaptability. Yet we often design still with static tools, or tools that offer a static understanding of the space. So what we are looking at on one side is how we can enable, or through the use of digital tools, how we can enable the understanding of the evolution over time, but also how we can potentially enable, for example, the simple visualization of positive impacts of design choices, or potentially negative impacts of design choices, in order to be able to make data-driven design decisions. So in order to do this, we work with the development often of urban simulators. So fundamentally, decision-making tools that enable us to understand or foresee the impacts of our decision-making processes in the process of urban design. So specifically, this project focuses on the issue of the urban heat island, and trying to understand what are some of the design decisions that we could potentially make in order to reduce urban heat island effect and foresee these kinds of impacts. So the project is called Waterloop, and it was developed by some of our students in the Master in City and Technology, together with both Alex and Jacopo as faculty who are here today. And the project worked within the context of Barcelona, with the access to data of Barcelona, and with the idea of creating an urban simulator that would allow designers to foresee the positive impacts of certain design decisions that would be made in the urban scale in terms of urban heat island. So the platform is a simple design platform. It's focused in this, just click play there. So it works with different questions. So as I was saying, working with the 4 dimensions of design. So looking at time as one of the factors, time in terms of seasonality, but also time in terms of the necessary time of evolution or implementation of certain design strategies. And it works in the idea of working collaboratively between streetscapes, unbuilt spaces, but also rooftop spaces, and working with all of these surfaces in a way in order to be able to implement solutions such as green systems or water treatment plants or micro ponds and water systems that can enable the reduction of urban heat island effect, as well as the implementation of vegetation in the city. So this allows us in some way to foresee different scenarios, or the impact of different scenarios within the context of urban design, and be able to make different design decisions, not only in relation to the actual design, but also understanding what is the water demand necessary for different design decisions, and how much of this water can we re-put in cycle, and how much strain consequently will design decisions not only coming from the natural environment, but how much further strain will we put on the natural environment within our urban contexts. So fundamentally, this allows us to identify a series of strategic axes that can then be pushed on a larger scale of urban design. So from the idea of visualizing or understanding the impact of design decisions within the urban environment, we also want to enable the understanding that design tools can not only allow us to collectively think or design landscape and public spaces together, but digital tools can also enable us to integrate other perspectives within the context of urban design. So for example, it enables us to work dynamically with landscape, but also embed the aspects or the desires of nature within the design process. So in relation to the question of habitat fragmentation that was raised earlier and this planetary urbanization, we look at how we can, through certain digital processes or computer-aided design processes, we can foster ecological connections in order to enhance the functioning of ecological systems and enhance the creation of vital ecosystem services that are fundamental for the planet's survival. Specifically, we look at the idea of creating connected urban environments. And so in order to take you through this, I want to take you through another project which was developed in the Internet of Cities studio, which is the first studio that is run by myself, Eduardo Rico, and Jacopo. This time we're looking at the context of Luxembourg in Europe. Luxembourg is a country that has one of the most fragmented terrains, but it's also a country that is home to several major rivers. And within this context, the city has a highly dense population. So the landscape or the natural ecosystem is incredibly fragile, and the pressure on this natural ecosystem is set to rise. Not only this, of course, with the pressure or the human pressure on the natural ecosystem, the risk of flooding due to urbanization is also increased. And not only this, but we also have other ecological issues, such as the high level of pollution within these areas, because due to often the high level of industrialization or working with raw or processes of materials. So fundamentally, with the access to all of this data, we can begin to look at the territory of Luxembourg, specifically the river systems, and identify a series of spaces that have incredibly high risk factors in terms of their ecological systems functioning. So in this sense, the students have localized 2 different zones, particularly, that are specifically sensitive and that are highly urbanized in order to understand what are the design solutions, or what are the design proposals, that we can begin to integrate, and how do we need to work within these territories in order to reduce our impact as human beings, but also work together with nature's needs and necessities for the ecological systems to return to thriving systems. Specifically, we work together with 3 main axes: the environmental axis, and the focus here is on improving the biodiversity, reducing the river pollution, and of course, mitigating the flood risks. We work with the social axes, so looking at how we can integrate citizens within the design process, but also the management process, and creating co-ownership models for the citizens to actively engage within these spaces. And then finally, the economic development. So from the reduction of costs related to the reduction of risks to the generation of new, potentially green or blue economies from these projects. So what we did was we looked at and collected a catalog of a series of possible interventions and that related to the specific axes that were outlined within the project's development. As well as understanding what were the possibilities, or what were the autochthonous or more or less autochthonous plants that we could work with in terms of bioremediation for the river system in itself. And from here, we start to engage actively with the digital tools of different types. So here we're using CESAR, which is a flood simulation tool, in order to be able to understand what is the movement or what are the flood risks within this river context. But not only to understand what are the risks, but also to simulate or understand how we can potentially work with this liquid landscape that has emerged, and redesign it or enable its design through the design of a series of meanders or patterns within the river in order to reduce the risk of flooding, but also enable the river to function and thrive as an ecological system. So with these simulations, fundamentally what we allow ourselves to do, once again, is work in a fourth dimension of time on a territorial scale and understand what are the impacts of the design within the context of the river system in order to be able to set a series of design decisions that can enable the river to once again come back to a thriving ecological system. So specifically, the river section is sort of designed in some way through these large-scale simulations into smaller scale interventions, functioning around the idea of creating new patterns for the meandering of the river in itself, the implementation of bioremediation forests, based on the plant catalog that we saw earlier, and the implementation of course, recreational areas to enhance the citizens' engagement with the natural spaces. So fundamentally here we work both with bottom-up and top-down approaches. The students also work strongly in understanding and identifying who are the stakeholders and what their role can be, but also how we can rely on different sort of approaches in implementing these design strategies. So the students also designed and implemented an app that enabled the citizens to, in some way, co-design or co-participate in the design, but also the management of these spaces, and the possibility of looking at how this could generate new microeconomies. For example, the procurement of localized food sources from, for example, a fruit forest that could be planted and embedded along the river. So fundamentally, what we work towards in some way creating or enhancing ecological connectivity, both in the mitigation of our impact within the spaces that were identified, but also the adaptation of these spaces towards thriving ecological systems once again. And with that, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I guess I can stop sharing my screen and we can go to I think we have many questions still in the chat. I don't know if Jacopo has been answering some of them while I have been presenting, but I think we can check them out.
Great. Thank you, Mathilde, Jacopo, for these amazing presentations, so visually striking. And as I was saying in the beginning, if you're watching this on your mobile phone, you're really missing out on mesmerizing graphics that really represent something in depth also. Very exciting projects of how you use tools to understand the environment and see things in a different way and make better decisions. We also saw that you had a lot of questions, as Mathilde was saying in the chat, and now's the time. There's a lot of questions that were related to the program that Alex, Jacopo, Mathilde, and Sarine have been answering already. But maybe we can have a quick round of questions related to the program. And also we want to encourage you to raise your hand and ask your questions that are not necessarily related to the program, but more topic related. So there were some that Mathilde encouraged you to actually elaborate on, vocally, so you could ask and so that Mathilde and Jacopo could answer. If you would like, start raising your hand for whoever has a question that you would like to elaborate on. And meanwhile, we picked up on some very interesting questions about people who would like to join the program and who are not necessarily from a planning background or a technical background. So people asking about social science background, human geography, anthropology. I want to invite Mathilde, Jacopo, Alex, Sarine to answer these questions and welcome people from very different backgrounds.
I don't know if Alex, you'd like to jump in on that one, maybe?
Happily. No, I mean, the program is made with the idea that if we're going to design and develop urban projects, we need a multiplicity of voices and backgrounds in order to bring additional value to the research that we create. Architects and planners tend to be, let's say, quite specific in their approaches, and they tend to forget a lot of the times the social aspects that are necessary to develop, to bring value to the urban environments. And that's why the program has been designed in such a way to, invite all these different disciplines. So it's not only focused on architects, planners, and designers, but also anthropologists, economists, entrepreneurs, data scientists. We've had a multiplicity of different experts join us as students in the past. We've had mathematicians, data scientists, environmental psychologists, real estate experts, and it's always amazing when you have a classroom that has this this diversity. We need it in a way in order for the research to properly develop. Mati, I see you unmuted. Would you like to add something?
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to add, I think that one of the goals of the program is definitely to put people from different disciplines together in the same arena, and use this diversity or multiplicity of backgrounds. Of course, everyone is learning then consequently different aspects about what it means to design the city. So we're fundamentally connecting together, let's say, the sciences around the design of city and the creative practices around the design of city in order to, in some way create the urban environments that we hope to live in the future. So I hope that answers the question. I think both Alex and myself, we dropped a couple of, there was a question about specific projects. We dropped a couple of links that you might be able to check out in terms of, for example, projects that work more towards the social sciences aspect of the projects. I also wanted to take a little bit of time maybe to address, there were a couple of questions about the divide in terms of access to data. So spaces that have access to local data versus how we work with spaces that don't have access to local data. So I don't know if, Jacopo, you want to jump in on that. It's true that today we did show fundamentally projects that worked with access to local data, but we do also work, I think Jacopo mentioned a little bit in his projects, maybe, I think, the idea of using sort of, sourcing the capacity to source with Google Earth Engine and other data sources. So Jacopo, please.
Yeah, perhaps it's a bit difficult to go in a presentation through all possible points. That was an interesting point. I was actually trying to look for other projects, but I was struggling now to find them. Indeed, it's a topic that many times is something that we discuss, specifically because in such a varied, I would say, team of students coming from all over the world, they always try to relate to their own context, to their own home, and struggle perhaps to adapt in a one-to-one perspective, let's say, to some other technology that we do through class. Indeed, there should always be split in between a moment of, let's say, teaching, perhaps, and a moment of researching. There's not one answer to all questions, but definitely it's a point that I would say that we many times tackle, but it becomes perhaps specific to projects, specific to the context and, let's say, the subject of study. But I would take it as more like a challenge, as something that yet needs to be further refined. One of, as Matilda was now pointing out, the excursus that I showed you on Google Earth Engine was in a way an answer to this issue. Indeed, it allows us to apply the same, let's say, the same algorithms, the same approach when, let's say, independently from whether we are studying Barcelona or Jakarta. So in that sense, it's an answer to this question, but of course it might lack sometimes some specificity or context that it might be provided in another way. So definitely next time I would also put some projects related to that.
Yeah, sorry about that we didn't think of that, but it's also true that, once you do, or although you do lack some specificity, where you do lack specificity, obviously you can strategically then identify very localized spaces where you can then do campaigns to collect the localized data to really get into the granularity of information that you require. So there's also lots of possibilities in that sense.
Great. Thank you, Matilde, Jacopo. I would really like to encourage you to maybe raise your hand and maybe ask your questions out loud, even if it's a big room. That would give you the chance to elaborate on some ideas. Meanwhile, I would also like to perhaps ask the questions about the program itself, on one hand, related to scholarships, opportunities for people who are not based in Barcelona, so for international students. So maybe, Alex, you can answer to that.
Yeah,
And yes,
sorry,
go
please
for it.
go. Thank you.
No,
No,
yeah.
because we've been receiving many questions in private and in the chat about our scholarships. So definitely it's clear that the tuition fees of the program they're expensive. So we have a series of scholarships to facilitate the admissions of our interested applicants. In fact, IAAC, I believe, every year gives more than 500,000 euros in scholarships. So we always try to facilitate as many people as possible. The way we structure our scholarships are basically in two ways. There's merit-based scholarships and needs-based financial support. Merit-based scholarships are basically structured throughout the year. So usually there's a scholarship competition in the beginning of the application period. Currently that is closed. After the scholarship competition, there is a series of industry scholarships in collaboration with our industry partners. And again, that is currently closed. And throughout the year, we run the Women in Tech Fund in an effort to integrate as many women in fields of technology and innovation as possible. This is currently running, so you're more than welcome to submit an application through the Women in Tech Fund. If I may ask you, Sarine, to drop a link in the chat for the fund itself, that would be very helpful. So these are the merit-based scholarships. And again, at this moment in time, only the Women in Tech Fund is running. At the same time, there's a needs-based financial support format that the students the applicants can use to request financial support. There's a form that you can upload with the rest of the supporting documents for your application, in which you can explain in written form what is the financial, say, conditions or limitations that you are facing. And again, this can be used to facilitate the tuition fees and receive a reduction, a discount in the overall tuition fees. And that's basically it. But definitely there's a lot of opportunities, and we're always very happy to help out as many people as possible.
Thanks, Alex. And we have a nice, courageous hand here. Matusz, please go ahead.
Hi, I'm Matosh. I'm from Prague, but I just finished my bachelor's degree in the United States. And I was wondering how the program, if at all, approaches fusing like large scale data with like in-person empirical observations, even if they transfer those to data, and kind of having both those inputs in the process.
Jacopo, do you want to answer this? And maybe I look for...
Gotta be super sincere, I missed the first part because I was still writing.
Data? Sorry, because we're trying to, sorry about that, Matusz. Thank you for the question.
Like split.
So super interesting question. It was looking at the question of infusing big data with localized data. So we have actually done this quite a lot, looking at the way in which we can gain a larger scale understanding of certain aspects of urban environments, and in parallel understand, for example, the emotional qualities that spaces provoke within the urban environment. So looking specifically at the small scale design. In fact, one of the important points of the program is that we do constantly negotiate between the very large territorial scale. So for example, the example that I showed in Luxembourg, it works in a very large territorial scale, the scale of the country, in fact, looking at sort of identifying certain risk areas. And then we zoom into specific sites. That project actually enabled through the app, which I didn't go into, the possibility of working with citizen science. So for example, not only co-designing, so designing the process, engaging with the citizens' desires for those specific spaces, but also co-management. So how we can use, for example, the app to collect data on the process of growth of these plants. We also have worked, for example, we have one of our students from a couple of years ago worked on this idea of a healing city, and she basically was trying to sort of extract the emotions that people feel within the urban environments, and embed these into design processes in order to sort of create or work with human emotions within the design of the city. If you give me a second, I will actually look for the link to this project and I'll drop it in the chat for you.
I already have it.
Okay, thank you.
We also want to work with sort of more traditional sort of survey systems as well. For example, when we developed the project Super Barrio, actually both Alex and Jacopo worked directly on this project. Super Barrio is a digital design, co-design platform, which is based on gamification and is oriented to enabling citizens to actively participate in the design of their urban public spaces, but not just participate in the design, but also understand what are the impacts of their design. So learning what it means to sort of choose certain elements within public space and understand what is their impact in terms of economy, for example, environment, energy consumption, and much more. And prior to implementing the first edition of the game, we developed a series of sort of in-person encounters in order to be able to collect data from the citizens in traditional survey manner, and these were integrated into the implementation. So we use, once again, sort of big data, which we have in terms of open access within the city of Barcelona, but also small data collected from the users of those specific spaces.
Thank you, Mathilde. Super. So I don't see hands raised. Perhaps Jacopo or Mathilde, you have identified some of the questions that you would like to elaborate more on. Maybe I can also ask you a question, actually, since it's a collaboration with All Things Urban, and we're always interested in career opportunities and how people can develop their careers in the field of urbanism, this very broad field where you can come from very different background, as we mentioned before. So I would like to ask you actually about possible career opportunities that are emerging in this field. So what can people expect to be looking for or working in after IAAC? So what's the future life after IAAC we saw with Jacopo about research and projects? And maybe you can elaborate a bit on the different kinds of opportunities that you can have once you leave the school.
I should answer that, Mati, but I'm gonna give it a go. Well, I would say that, of course, that is also very much depending on the person and their own interests, but we definitely have all our students that have been involved either on a design level. So like we have students that have been then going to big, let's say, companies for a matter of urban designing. But at the same time, we also have other students that have been still staying at the planning perspective and also perhaps on a more analytical level, as well as we also have students that were very proud that continue also researching and engaged on a PhD, let's say, career path. That is also something that, of course, depending on the interest of each one of us, it might trigger you one path or another. I would also point out, and that for me maybe was a part that I didn't discuss, but there was also something that I ended up working in interior. So while I was studying, even though the whole master was about cities, I was working in an architecture office for interior design. And I would say that was also something that was made possible, well, in this case, actually through Mathilde, but I would say through the IAAC community, because of course we are just one master among many others. And it's very easy to engage with other aspects related to design or related to architecture. So in that sense, we also have students that have been perhaps changing a bit and still maybe approaching cities, but on a level that it's very small. So engaging more with fabrication and establishing, let's say, more participatory processes of how to trigger, let's say, active processes at the city level, but from very pinpointed actions. So in that sense, it's also very easy, I would say, to bridge in between the fields, specifically for my field, that it's more related to computation. I would try to show that, like, it will just depending on the interest and curiosity of each one of us.
If I may add to that, basically we
Please.
can narrow down the career paths of our alumni into 4 different paths. One is, as Jacopo mentioned, usually there's many alumni that continue down the path of research and academia. There's a lot of opportunities found there, whether it's a PhD or research activities in a research center related to urban studies. That is very common. The second very common path is the private sector, working in a private firm as a planner, urban designer, analyst, data analyst, or consultant on topics related again to infrastructure, resource management, transportation and mobility, or even policy making. The third path is actually very common for this program, which is joining the public sector, city councils, urban administration, urban governance. Again, there's a very big need, especially because there's a lot of cities that are now undergoing digital transformations. There's a very big need for a profile like this. Again, whether it is a consultant or an analyst or policy expert, this program allows for that. And finally, which is, we've also seen this quite a lot, is entrepreneurship, startups, alumni starting their own services, their own tools, their own companies, exactly because there's a very big, let's say, market related to geolocalized data and creating insights and based on geolocalized data. We've seen a lot of our alumni going down that path. More or less, these are the 4 different approaches that we see in our alumni.
Wonderful. Great. And as the session is coming to an end, thank you for everyone who posted their questions. I'm going to post a short feedback form over here, so you can let us know what you thought. I want to really thank Jacopo, Mathilde for your amazing presentations, for Alex and Sarine for joining us and being, answering all of the questions. So we highly encourage you to apply to this master's program as soon as possible, because positions are filling up quite fast. And to everyone who joined today, and even for those who left, we'll send you a registration of the recording, of the session. We'll send you also the link to the contact points of IAAC, so mainly Alex, Sarine, so you can ask all of your questions. Today was your opportunity to see the full team over here, but you can still have a chance, of course, to contact them privately over email. I'm going to share again the link to the master's. I think it was shared 3,000 times already in the chat in different ways, but just so you don't scroll up, you'll find it directly. Thank you for everyone who was here. Hope you enjoyed this session. We hope you had some answers for your questions, and of course, feel free to reach out to the team.
If we didn't answer any of your questions, because I saw there were so many and I'm not sure we managed to answer all of them, please reach out to us via email and we will get back to you in the shortest time possible. And I'm sorry we didn't manage to answer them now, but thank you so much, everyone, for joining us.
I'm going to drop my email in the chat for anybody who wants to reach out.
Amazing. So many questions, very little time. We hope this condensed session was useful for all of you. And on this note, thank you, everyone, and have a great evening, day, morning, wherever you are.
Fantastic.
Goodbye.
Thanks, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you all.